Opening scene. A bright morning in downtown Atlanta. The courthouse stands tall, a symbol of justice. The streets are busy with lawyers, clerks, and plaintiffs heading in and out of the building. Among them is Malcolm Wright, a sharp-dressed black attorney in his mid-30s, carrying a leather briefcase and radiating confidence. Narrator, serious tone. The American justice system was built on the principles of fairness and equality, but for some, those principles are tested the moment they step into the courtroom. Today, one man's fight for justice would take an unexpected turn, one that no one saw coming. Visual transition. Malcolm walks up the courthouse steps, adjusting his tie. He takes a deep breath, ready for the big case ahead. Narrator. Malcolm Wright was no ordinary lawyer. With years of experience and an impressive track record, he had fought for justice in some of the toughest cases. But on this day, Malcolm would not be fighting for his client. He would be fighting for his very right to stand in the courtroom. Fade into Malcolm's backstory. Clips of him graduating law school, passing the bar exam, and winning his first big case. Narrator. Born and raised in Chicago, Malcolm knew what it meant to work hard. He had spent his entire life proving that success was possible despite the obstacles society placed in his way. From excelling in law school to earning respect in the courtroom, he had defied expectations time and time again. But what happened on this day would be different. It wasn't about skill or experience. It was about something far beyond his control. The scene returns to the courthouse. Malcolm approaches the security checkpoint, where an officer in uniform stands at the entrance. Other lawyers walk past without issue, flashing their ID badges. Malcolm reaches into his pocket, ready to do the same. Security guard, stern tone. Sir, this entrance is for attorneys only. Malcolm raises an eyebrow, momentarily confused. He pulls out his state-issued bar ID, holding it up confidently. Malcolm Wright. I am an attorney. Here's my ID. I have a case in Courtroom 3B. The guard takes the ID, but doesn't even glance at it before shaking his head. Security guard. I said, this entrance is for attorneys only. A beat of silence. Malcolm's jaw tightens. Malcolm Wright. And I just told you. I am an attorney. The guard narrows his eyes, as if studying Malcolm, then glances toward his partner. Security guard number 2, shrugging. I don't know, man. He doesn't look like a lawyer to me. The words hit Malcolm like a slap in the face. A wave of emotions, frustration, disbelief, anger, rushes through him, but he keeps his composure. Narrator. In that moment, Malcolm realized exactly what was happening. It didn't matter that he had spent years studying law. It didn't matter that he had won case after case. It didn't even matter that he had a legal right to be in that courtroom. To them, he didn't look like a lawyer. And that was enough to keep him out. A flashback plays of Malcolm's experiences growing up, being followed in stores, stopped for random searches, underestimated by teachers. The look on his face now says it all. This moment wasn't new. It was just another reminder of the world he lived in. Malcolm inhales sharply, forcing himself to stay calm. He gestures toward a group of white attorneys passing through the checkpoint without issue. Malcolm Wright. You didn't check their IDs. But you're checking mine twice? Why is that? The first security guard stiffens. A few people in line glance over, sensing the tension. Malcolm isn't raising his voice, but his presence is commanding. Security guard. Sir, I need you to step aside. Malcolm Wright, firmly. Step aside for what? I have every right to enter. Security guard. I don't have to explain myself to you. A tense silence. Malcolm clenches his jaw. His case is set to begin in just minutes, but now he's caught in an argument he shouldn't even be having. A young white attorney named David Carter, one of Malcolm's colleagues, approaches from behind. David Carter, casually. Hey Malcolm, ready for today's hearing? The security guards immediately relax. One even nods at David, who walks past without issue. Malcolm turns to David, his frustration growing. Malcolm Wright. To David, low voice. They won't let me in. David frowns, looking from Malcolm to the guards. David Carter. What? He's one of the best attorneys here. Why are you stopping him? The guards exchange a look. One of them sighs. Security guard. We just needed to confirm. David Carter, cutting in. Confirm what? His ID is right there. The air is thick with tension. A few more people have started paying attention. Malcolm takes a deep breath, gripping his briefcase tighter. Narrator. At this moment, Malcolm had two choices. Step aside and let the moment pass, or stand his ground and challenge the injustice head-on. His career had been built on fighting for the rights of others, but now he had to fight for himself. The scene slows, zooming in on Malcolm's face as he makes his decision. He turns back to the guards, standing tall. Malcolm Wright, calm but firm. I will not be stepping aside. Either you let me in, or you explain, right now, why you're stopping a licensed attorney from entering a public courthouse where he is scheduled to represent his client. A long pause. The first guard shifts uncomfortably, sensing the growing attention from bystanders. Before anyone can respond, a deep voice cuts through the tension. Judge Harrison, off-screen. Is there a problem here? All heads turn. Standing at the entrance is Judge William Harrison, a respected and seasoned judge with decades of experience. His piercing eyes scan the scene, taking in the standoff between Malcolm and the security guards. Narrator. Just when Malcolm thought he had seen it all, the presence of the judge himself would change everything. But what happened next? No one could have predicted. As Judge William Harrison approaches, the tension thickens. The security guards straighten their postures, suddenly looking uneasy. Malcolm turns to face the judge, his expression a mix of frustration and resolve. Judge Harrison, firm but neutral. What's going on here? The first security guard, still gripping Malcolm's ID, hesitates before responding. Security guard. We were just verifying credentials, Your Honor. Judge Harrison's gaze flickers between Malcolm and the guards. He sees the ID still in the officer's hand. He takes a step forward, raising an eyebrow. Judge Harrison. And, did you find anything wrong with them? The guard looks flustered. He glances at his partner, as if seeking support, but his partner remains silent. Security guard. Well, no, but... Judge Harrison, cutting in. Then why is Mr. Wright still standing here instead of being in my courtroom where he is supposed to be? A murmur spreads among the nearby attorneys and court staff who have stopped to watch the scene unfold. Malcolm, still composed but clearly irritated, finally speaks. Malcolm Wright. That's exactly what I was trying to figure out, Your Honor. The judge exhales sharply, looking at the guards with clear disapproval. Judge Harrison. This man is one of the top defense attorneys in this courthouse. He has every right to be here, and frankly, I'm embarrassed that this is even a conversation. The security guard shifts awkwardly but doesn't apologize. Instead, he merely hands Malcolm's ID back, avoiding eye contact. Security guard muttering. You can go in. Narrator. Malcolm had won this battle, but the war was far from over. As he walked into the courtroom, his mind raced. This wasn't just about him. It was about a much bigger issue that played out every day in ways both subtle and overt. Cut to Malcolm taking his seat at the defense table. His client, a nervous young man named Jared Thompson, whispers. Jared Thompson. Everything okay, Mr. Wright? Malcolm Wright, forcing a small smile. It will be. But inside, Malcolm isn't convinced. He glances at the jury box, then at the prosecution team, all of whom walked in freely without a second glance from security. He exhales slowly, turning his focus to the case at hand. Narrator. What Malcolm experienced wasn't an isolated incident. Across the country, countless Black professionals, doctors, professors, executives, and yes, even attorneys, faced the same quiet yet persistent challenge, being seen as an outsider in spaces they had every right to occupy. Flashbacks appear, other Black attorneys recounting similar experiences. A Black female lawyer recalls being asked if she was a defendant instead of an attorney. A young Black male prosecutor describes how judges would mistake him for a law student, even though he had argued cases for years. An older attorney remembers being stopped and questioned every single time he entered a new courthouse. Narrator. For Malcolm, today's incident wasn't just about inconvenience. It was about something deeper, an unspoken message that no matter how successful, how accomplished, or how professional he was, there would always be someone questioning his place. Back in the courtroom, the trial proceeds. Malcolm delivers a strong opening statement, commanding the room's attention. He's in his element, proving why he belongs. But even as he speaks, the thought lingers. What if the judge hadn't intervened? What if no one had been there to witness what happened? How many others have been stopped like this, with no one to defend them? Narrator. The fight for justice wasn't just in the courtroom. Sometimes, it started at the very door. Malcolm sits in his office later that evening, replaying the day's events in his head. He should be celebrating his courtroom victory. His client, Jared Thompson, had just been acquitted, but the sting of what happened at the courthouse entrance overshadows the win. He picks up his phone and dials a familiar number. The call connects. Malcolm Wright. Sandra, do you have a moment? Something happened today that I need to talk about. Sandra Miller, sounding concerned. Of course, Malcolm. What's going on? Sandra Miller is a fellow attorney, a civil rights advocate, and one of Malcolm's closest colleagues. She's no stranger to these issues. Malcolm Wright. Security stopped me outside the courtroom. Wouldn't let me in. Said I didn't look like a lawyer. If Judge Harrison hadn't stepped in, I don't know how long they would have kept me out. A pause. Then Sandra exhales, the frustration clear in her voice. Sandra Miller. Malcolm, I wish I could say I'm surprised. But you and I both know this isn't new. It's been happening to attorneys like us for years. You remember what happened to Greg last year? Malcolm nods, recalling how their friend, Greg Holloway, had been stopped at another courthouse. Security had refused to let him enter until he produced his bar card, something rarely asked of his white colleagues. Malcolm Wright. Yeah, I remember. And I'm done just brushing it off. This isn't just an inconvenience. It's a systemic issue. How many black lawyers have to prove they belong in spaces they've earned their way into? Sandra is silent for a moment, then speaks decisively. Sandra Miller. Then let's do something about it. Over the next few weeks, Malcolm and Sandra start digging. They reach out to other black attorneys, collecting stories. What they find is staggering. An assistant district attorney describes being stopped in the courthouse every single day despite working there for years. A public defender recounts how a judge once mistook him for the defendant he was representing. A corporate lawyer shares how, at a legal conference, multiple attendees assumed he was a waiter instead of a speaker. Narrator. Malcolm realized that his experience was just the tip of the iceberg. What happened to him wasn't just about one security guard. It was part of a broader pattern of racial bias embedded in the legal system itself. Soon, Sandra compiles the data into a report, detailing dozens of similar incidents across the country. The findings are clear. Black attorneys face higher scrutiny, more frequent challenges to their credentials, and a constant need to prove themselves in a system that should recognize their authority. Sitting in a conference room at the local Black Bar Association, Malcolm and Sandra go over their findings with a group of legal professionals. Sandra Miller. We have the data. Now the question is, what do we do with it? A prominent civil rights attorney, Darnell Roberts, leans forward. Darnell Roberts. We make noise. We take this to the state bar, the media, anyone who will listen. If judges can step in after the fact, why can't the system prevent this in the first place? Malcolm Wright. Exactly. But we need a clear demand. We're not just telling stories, we're pushing for change. A heated discussion follows. Some suggest legal action. Others propose formal complaints to the Judicial Conduct Board. But ultimately, they decide on a multi-step approach. 1. Gather more testimonies. The more real stories they have, the harder they'll be to ignore. 2. File an official complaint. A formal request to the State Bar Association to address racial bias in courthouse security procedures. 3. Go public. Contact journalists and legal publications to expose the issue on a larger scale. 4. Push for policy change. Advocate for mandatory bias training for courthouse security and accountability measures for wrongful stops. Narrator. This wasn't just about calling out discrimination. It was about fixing a broken system. Malcolm knew that change wouldn't come easy, but he also knew that silence wouldn't change anything. Malcolm and Sandra finalized the report, carefully compiling the testimonies, statistics, and legal arguments. It's a damning document, revealing the extent of racial bias black attorneys face in courthouses nationwide. With everything in place, they take their first major step, filing an official complaint with the State Bar Association. The response is lukewarm at best. A formal acknowledgement letter arrives, but there's no immediate action. Sandra, frustrated, slaps the letter onto Malcolm's desk. Sandra Miller. This is their response. A vague, "We will review the matter." Malcolm, they're trying to sweep this under the rug. Malcolm Wright, leaning back in his chair, thoughtful. Then we don't let them. He picks up his phone and dials a number. 2 rings, then a voice answers. Malcolm Wright. Ms. Davenport? I have something you'll want to see. Cynthia Davenport, an investigative journalist known for exposing injustices in the legal system, meets with Malcolm and Sandra. She flips through their report, her eyes widening as she reads the testimonies. Cynthia Davenport. This is huge. These aren't isolated incidents. It's systemic. Sandra Miller. Exactly. And we need the public to see it. The next morning, the headline breaks. Loudspeaker, racial bias in the courtroom. Black lawyers speak out on systemic discrimination. The article goes viral, sparking an intense conversation on social media. Lawyers across the country start sharing their own experiences, and soon, the issue reaches national news outlets. Malcolm and Sandra are invited for interviews on major networks, speaking on the realities of bias in the legal system. The State Bar Association, now under public scrutiny, is forced to respond. They announce a formal review of courthouse security policies and implicit bias training for all courthouse staff. But Malcolm and Sandra know that statements mean nothing without action. Malcolm writes at a press conference, "We don't need performative statements. We need real change. That means accountability, policy shifts, and a clear process for reporting discrimination in courtrooms across this country." Soon, their work gains momentum. A coalition of civil rights lawyers drafts a proposal for stricter anti-discrimination policies in courthouses. Several high-profile judges voice their support. Even Judge Harrison speaks publicly, calling for reforms. Some weeks later, Malcolm walks into the courthouse again. This time, the security guards wave him through without hesitation. He notices a new sign near the entrance. Scroll discrimination complaints? Report here, a direct result of the pressure they applied. He takes a deep breath and steps inside, feeling a small but significant shift. Change is happening, but the fight isn't over. Narrator. Malcolm had spent his career fighting for justice inside the courtroom. But now, he had learned that sometimes, the biggest battles start before you even walk through the door. Weeks turn into months. The initial media buzz dies down, but Malcolm and Sandra refuse to let the issue fade into obscurity. They continue working with legal advocacy groups, ensuring that their fight for reform doesn't stop at symbolic gestures. The State Bar Association, under sustained pressure, finally announces a new initiative, mandatory implicit bias training for courthouse security, judges, and legal staff. Additionally, a formal complaint system is implemented to hold individuals accountable for discriminatory actions. At a public meeting, Malcolm and Sandra sit in the audience as the Bar Association's president makes the announcement. Bar Association President. We recognize that racial bias has no place in our legal system. These new measures are a step toward ensuring that every legal professional is treated with the dignity and respect they deserve. The room erupts in applause, but Malcolm remains cautious. He knows policies are only as strong as their enforcement. Sometime later, Malcolm receives an unexpected email. It's from a young black law student, Jordan Carter, who had been following the case. Envelope with arrow email from Jordan Carter. Mr. Wright, I just wanted to thank you. I start my internship at the courthouse next month, and because of you, I won't have to worry about whether security will believe I belong there. You've made it easier for the next generation of black lawyers. Thank you. Malcolm reads the email twice, a rare smile crossing his face. This is why he fights. This is why he'll keep fighting. A year later, Malcolm walks back into the same courthouse where he was once denied entry. This time, no one stops him. He walks past a diverse group of young attorneys, some of whom recognize him from the news and nod in quiet respect. He enters the courtroom, ready for his next case, ready to keep pushing for justice, not just for his clients, but for the system itself. Narrator. Malcolm Wright learned that change doesn't happen overnight. It takes persistence, courage, and an unwillingness to accept the status quo. The fight for equality in the legal profession is far from over. But because of his stand, the path forward is a little clearer for those who come next.